The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Hello and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly, wait for it, watch along podcast. This week, returning to you to talk about a television show instead of our normal book fare. We are here to discuss episode 3 and episode 4 of season 2 of the Wheel of Time television program. I don't remember what the names of those episodes were, and you would have thought from the episode you just listened to that we would have prepared that, and yet we somehow did not. Shush. Nobody's introduced you yet. You're not allowed to talk. I am Greg. I am your host who knows very little about the Wheel of Time, and especially very little about the Wheel of Time TV show. In fact, Tylor, your other host who will join me momentarily, has engineered it so all our friends are now watching this show, and he controls my watching habits and doesn't let me watch for months until everybody is already sick of talking about it. Tylor, you're allowed a one-word rebuttal.
No. But really what I want to say... I do want to point out the irony of me directly controlling your access to the media while constantly telling my students how no one should control anyone's access to the media. I contradict every one of my lessons in every one of these podcasts. I am very excited to get an opportunity to dive into season 2 of Amazon's The Wheel of Time. When we were recording the first season episodes, we were in the midst of the SAG strike and what have you. And so I couldn't be as enthusiastic as I wanted to be about the second season of this television show. And y'all, I am extremely enthusiastic about the second season of this television show. Do you know how enthusiastic I am? We are making Through the Glass Columns history today. That's right. For the first time ever, we have a repeat guest. Yeah, we have a guest. I should have led with that, I suppose. Ben, feel free to reintroduce yourself to the podcast.
Hey, I cannot believe I'm the first repeat guest. I feel honored and delighted. And I also want to express how much I love this show. Like, I think it's rewatching these episodes, since Tylor let me watch them a long time ago, was really satisfying.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, kind of big picture, now that we have a couple of people and can bounce kind of opinions off of everyone. Before we dive into kind of individual character plot lines, I'm curious, Ben, where you put this show in kind of your year of television, right? Like 2023, early 24 sort of thing. Where are you thinking of this as a great show, as an average show? And then, Greg, you can also answer this for the half of the television program you've watched.
I would put it very high. It's definitely one of the great shows that I watched. It's very hard for me to remember things that came out, what year things came out. I can only remember the Addams Family show came out at the beginning of last year. That was
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday, this one. And
I think this was actually airing at exactly the same time as Ahsoka, is part of why I thought of this, is I remember having conversations between you and me and another of our friends about kind of comparing those shows. And I know Greg obviously wasn't involved in that at the time because I control his media consumption, apparently. So I didn't know if you had if your thoughts had changed on kind of the relative placement of those genre shows. And then Greg, be contemplating that thought, because I doubt that you were directly comparing Ahsoka and The Wheel of Time when you were watching them, because you were only watching one.
Yeah, I was having oddly guilty feelings as a Star Wars fan because I was more excited about to watch Wheel of Time than I was to watch Ahsoka. No disrespect on Ahsoka, but there's just something really cool and new about the way that they're building the world for that show.
Greg, your one-word rebuttal.
Yes. I think what I would actually do in that comparison, and we're not a Star Wars podcast, we just all live and breathe Star Wars on our downtime. So I would say, one of the things that frustrated me about Ahsoka as a television show is it was trading on the familiar and kind of what gets pejoratively called fan service. And the people who love that show, no disrespect, I think really love seeing familiar characters and familiar things. And what's interesting is I would say the success of this half a season of Wheel of Time I've watched so far is actually trading on not the unfamiliar, right?
Yeah.
Like surprising you and restructuring and sending characters in different directions. And I will voice this on air after we just lectured Ben off air before we began. We try really hard in these episodes not to do kind of straight comparison between book and television show. We don't want to spoil either for either person, for either group of fans. If we're assuming the majority of people listening have listened to our shows about the books and are now interested in our thoughts on the show, but in case somebody's in one of those camps, we kind of don't get peanut butter in our chocolate, as it were. So I think whereas that is just kind of our policy we settled on, the show actually kind of asks for that. And Ben, you pointed this out to me. It's like it's very much its own thing, and it's not really interested in just trading on the familiar. And so many core adaptations are just the exact text put on screen. But I think this is trying to do something really different. I actually don't even know if I have all the reasons why it does it, but it's interesting.
Watching these today, it was interesting because I follow along with the podcast. So, Greg, you're actually ahead of me in the book because I'm only kind of reading week by week each chapters. And when I watched the show originally, when it was coming out, and you guys were not in the new book yet at that point, it was much earlier. I had an easier time keeping everything straight. I found watching it again today, there's like it's a weird thing of how my memories form where parts of the show and the book have merged together, and I really do see them as two separate things, but I do sometimes get confused about what's real. I often, reading the book, I tend to think things that happened in the show happened, but they didn't actually happen. So yeah.
So I think if we're kind of in the vein of things that have changed and things that stayed the same, I think this is a really great opportunity to transition into what was the beginning of our 2 episodes, Nynaeve's test to become an accepted, which I am going to tell all of our listeners, both of you today or yesterday, apparently started with episode 4 and then watched episode 3. So my question I'm about to ask may make no sense to either of you. But I was really curious because when I watched the show for the first time, I watched that 3rd episode. And at the end of when we get to the credits at the beginning of that 3rd episode, it appears as if Nynaeve is not coming out of the arches, right? Once you finish the episode, you know that eventually she does. But I was left as a book reader wondering, how far are they going to change this, right? Are they going to have her, be in the arches for a significant period of time? Are they gonna, do something completely different than what we'd seen before? Ben, obviously, you were the only one who experienced episode 3 in real time and hadn't seen episode 4 first. How faked out were you? And how much do you think that, I guess we were just discussing that. How do you think this ties into this idea of the show being willing to do things that aren't in the book at all?
I guess I would say that I don't think I was too faked out because it all takes place in the course of one episode. And I did get a little surprised. I mean, I remember watching it and thinking, I like the way that they did it, where it's a little bit vague about whether she's left or not, right? Until it starts to get really obvious when she starts seeing Lan and things don't match up anymore. But I think they did that really well, and they left that kind of 40-minute gap or whatever to represent all the years that Nynaeve was living in the other place. And I felt like that was really kind of nicely done. So when you got back to Nynaeve after a while and lots of other things that happened, it was just good. It was just good editing. It made it feel more like she'd actually spent some time living in that world.
Yeah, it ended up to me feeling much more almost like Narnia or something. Like you just alluded to this, but like she had lived a life in the time that she was in the Arch, where, when we flashed that way in the book, I don't think I ever really thought she was stuck or that it was actually taken that long to go with. And I'll just say I thought the visuals of the arches and the way that the other Aes Sedai opened them, I thought all of that really worked quite well. And the way the doors appeared within the tests each time, but heartbreakingly for the third time eventually, I thought that all worked really well. And I want to shout that out because I was so critical of special effects, especially in the first season when we had some, kind of janky looking Trollocs and such. But it all looked really good, and it seemed to fill that. George R. R. Martin, who is not dead, was rolling over in his grave because they had the opportunity to have a naked woman running through arches and they just clothed her. You probably should in the year 2024.
uh, I actually really love, you were talking about the effects that were associated with the arches. I just love the fact that they built the entire chamber and let the arches themselves be a practical effect that they then were able to CGI on top of. I thought just the scale of it really sold it in a way that you wouldn't get if it was more purely CGI. Was there anything else in that sequence, or also kind of the Egwene Elaine scenes we get parallel to that afterwards that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, if we're kind of mixing the whole sequence from start to end, I think one thing that really stood out to me watching it is that they make a point of every time there's the rhythm where they say that the way back will come only but once, and then she goes in and then she comes out and then she's washed with the waters and purified of the sins that she did and that happened to her. But as a result of that, the last time when she comes out, it really stood out to me this time that she's not purified of the sins. Like everyone's the Aes Sedai have given up on her. So when she comes out, she's still going to hold on to all that because that last part of the ritual never happens.
I just want to shout out the choice. I really thought the choice in the first one when she is a little girl, but they let it be the actress we're familiar with, and then signal that all the other characters are seeing her as a little girl. I thought that was again a nice trick of editing. Ben already complimented the editor, who I have no idea who edited the show, but deserves a little credit because it was a nice little trick to kind of give a flash of that and let us stay with the actress we're familiar with and let her react, because it's kind of one of those things where her consciousness is essentially that person, even if she's appearing as the young girl. So I think there weren't too many surprises, and my memories are vague. So I will say, we've talked before about good adaptation just honoring the spirit, and I think the spirit of those tests was pretty much identical to how I felt of them in the books. And I thought getting to see, I guess my big takeaway is the Nynaeve actress is very good, and so getting her to see her do these scenes and fill in a little bit of Nynaeve's backstory was really nice, and made me care a little bit more about that character, who I think I was slow to warm up to in the books.
I think all three of us are actually going to call out different details in one of the three visions, because I actually want to call out in the third before she exits the arches. I just thought that like 20-30 seconds of blackness and cutting between kind of creepy sounds was a really effective sequence. And then that's kind of the first of the fake outs. You think that is the only kind of path through the arch, and then later on you find out. I thought that was just really effective. Any last thoughts on kind of Nynaeve through the arches? Because I don't want to spend a full 30 minutes on just the sequence that was the first 5 minutes of this episode.
One other thing is that I also liked the rhythm of how in the first scene it ends with her in the basement, and then in the last scene at the end of the show, the first thing she does is she takes her girl down to the basement. And it really seemed to go with the time idea that this was a whole cycle that had just come around to a complete revolution, and she must see that in some way, and that's why she leaves through the arch again.
Great insight. I hadn't thought of that. And the shot of her mother looking through the crack in the floorboards as she's killed was really upsetting in the right kind of way, and kind of visceral. It made me think of like Inglorious Bastards and other people hiding in the basement moments. So yeah, it worked very well.
And I think as we're kind of talking about the cyclical nature of the test itself, I think there's also something to the fact, you called this out, Ben, the visions both begin and end in the basement, but the episode also begins and ends in the same chamber in the basement of the tower. And I really wanted to call out that scene with Egwene and Elaine in the basement, where Egwene is trying to reopen the arches and is unable to do so. I thought both of the actresses in that scene did just an exceptional job. And then obviously, once Nynaeve gets on the scene, she's wonderful as always. I honestly don't have much to say about the second of the two episodes on this plot line. I think the real showpiece for these characters is primarily in that first episode. Anything else we want to highlight about these characters? I would maybe say other than Leandrin, who I want to kind of put a little asterisk next to after this. Anything else for Egwene, Elaine, or Nynaeve in this episode? Let's start with Greg, just to reverse the rhythm.
What did we just hear you say? We have to have the same order and the same pattern. I don't have much else. I just want to say, because it was my start to watching these episodes, sorry, we'll stop harping on the mistake I made. But when Nynaeve appears in her accepted dress, I just really liked that costume. I liked the way the colors of the Aja were around her wrists and kind of woven and patterned, that all fit really well. Actually will just give a general statement that the costuming is impeccable in these shows, and the thumbnail for episode 4, if people are on their Prime accounts, is Moraine Rosamund Pike in her blue outfit, and it's like you just kind of pause and are like, wow, this is really stunning costuming work. Something that kind of is of fantasy but seems to be unique in its own way. So it really stood out to me with Nynaeve's costume there, because I hadn't pictured something like that for the accepted. I kind of always, I think, pictured them kind of in their shifts, that kind of very plain blank cloth, but this was nice and it worked really well.
I think I'll mention probably a couple of times in this episode about how the show has made me enjoy some of the characters more, and Elaine's definitely one of those. And I think the portrayal of Elaine in the show complements the one in the book well, and that she's got the kind of she's royalty, all that. But the actress in this, when she's in there and she's talking to Egwene, and Egwene's just like, I just met you in this dorm.
Yeah.
We're still freshmen. I don't really know you. Get out of here. But the acting between them is really good. And so I think it helps me connect more with Elaine in the book in a weird way.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And if we're talking about kind of the really fantastic portrayal of Elaine that we get, that I agree is almost more rounded than what we get from that character early on in the books. The other character who I see in this plot line just getting an enormous amount more kind of just character support than they get in the book is Leandrin, who that actress has just been putting on a clinic in season 2 of this show, and episode 4 in particular, when we kind of get the first real signs that she is not completely on the up and up, is a really great moment that she delivers well. From either of you, thoughts, reviews, raves about Leandrin and her kind of role in this episode?
I think the actress does a really good job on using the technique of she acts like her character thinks she's doing the right thing, it's hard to get that in the book. The book is more like, I am evil and I love being evil. But in this, you really kind of get more the feeling like she is it's mostly just the way that it's performed in a way, really, that she's you sometimes when she's talking, when she's kind of trying to convince some of the girls that they should join up with her, I start to believe her a little bit, and that's just like the good acting on that part.
Mm. I really like characters that are the kind of manipulate around the edges, and I think that's the role they've kind of put her in. That she's, it's accomplished in whispers and little gestures, and I think these episodes put in contrast what she was doing before and how she got Nynaeve to take this path and all those pieces. So yeah, I think you're both right that if it was just like I mean it's obviously a woman, but like mustache twirling and so on, it really would feel false and fake. I think Ben nailed it, which is if she's going to be doing these things, it's because she thinks it's the right thing to do, not because she really wants power or something like that.
I think you see
What
that.
did you think, Tyler?
Oh.
Oh, go ahead,
Nope, Ben, continue.
I think she genuinely seems to care that Nynaeve hasn't come back. She generally seems it when she's talking to Matt and when she's talking when she's
Yeah.
defending herself in multiple scenes. She genuinely seems to care that about Nynaeve. So that's the surprise.
I think that is kind of the lesson that I'm getting about Leandrin. And to some degree, what I love about this show is that Robert Jordan, I think, is really good at creating characters that have depth, and then his characters only notice the outer surface. And so you can kind of infer what's going on behind the scenes. Whereas I think the show has done a really good job of taking that subtext and making it text, right? Giving Leandrin an opportunity to be emotional in addition to scheming, or to give Nynaeve an opportunity to kind of show, or Elaine, you were talking about earlier, I think is a great example where she doesn't just show or act in a certain way to show that she's not just stuck up, she's saying it and she's talking through it with other characters. I think that works really effectively here, right? Just giving Leandrin lines, if nothing else, lets her be a deeper character than what we have gotten previously. I think that's absolutely right. Last thoughts on this plot line so that we don't spend a full hour just talking about this plot line. Shaking of heads is excellent. Okay. In that case, if we started with what I think of as the emotional core of the two episodes, the Nynaeve test, and then at the end with Leandrin kind of betraying the girls, I then want to move on to a couple of plot lines that are not going to have a whole lot of conversation, I suspect. Lan and Ilana et al. Are separate from everyone else in these two episodes. There's a lot of meditation. There's a little bit of suspicion of Moraine. I think it's interesting. I think Lan is another character who I would put in the same category you were giving before, Ben, of someone who I'm learning to love in the show, who, maybe I didn't get quite as much of in the book. What were people's thoughts on this plot line, if we can even justify giving it that large of a title? Greg, I will let you go first to solve the ordering problem.
I think this for me was the one where it felt like it's clear they have plans for Lan, but they're not going to be in these episodes. And this is actually something Game of Thrones was guilty of a lot. They just kind of pause a plot line for a couple episodes. And I think the scenes we got, I couldn't necessarily tell what was significant in them. I liked the setting. I liked this idea. I don't entirely know what to make of the green Aja who's with him, whether her motives are pure or, I don't think she's a dark friend or anything like that, but like, is she just somebody who wants to collect land essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And we get a sense that she enjoys the fellas. Yeah, I found myself not literally fast forwarding, but kind of mentally like, okay, let's go back to some of the other characters, which I think fits with your introduction to this plot line.
I find the scenes in the RFL Borderlands to be pretty endearing, and I just want to say I do quite like the feature that when you pause on Prime Video, it gives you that kind of information. So, so I know that. And it's because I enjoy I enjoy two things. I enjoy the kind of brotherhood between Lan, Maxim, and Yvonne.
Yep.
And those like Maxim and Yvonne are like real characters. I don't even know if they must be mentioned in the book, but I don't feel like they have a real role. Yvonne
Accurate.
at one point, like, well, Maxim's the one who says that he's been cut off from Alana,
Yep.
right? And he's basically giving the idea to Lan, like, just because you've been cut off doesn't mean you can't go back.
Yeah.
If you want to. That's pretty cool. And then Yvonne, he has that line like, we quiet ones, we're quiet during conversations because the conversations are always playing out in our heads.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like he and Lan are kind of connecting about being introverts or whatever. So I love that aspect. And I also love the general horniness of all of the Alana scenes, and her family being like, wow, you're bringing a third guy. Where does he go?
I think my favorite thing about that is her family was like, wow, you're bringing a third guy. It took longer than we expected. They were like, whoa, you're slowing down now, Alana. I think the moment that really worked for me the best in this is in the previous episode, I felt like there was the big gut punch when Moraine tells Lan we were never equal. And I forget which of the warders it was. I think it might have been Yvonne who tells Lan, of course you're not equal. They can blow up things and destroy the world, and we're the people who keep them safe. And I thought that moment was a really kind of fascinating way of contextualizing what was the still like lingering ouch from the second episode when they get to that. I'm still kind of unconvinced at how much it won over Lan, but for me as a viewer, I'm like, yeah, that's what I needed to hear. Thank you, show.
In that regard, it like how I forget things week to week because we're reading these books so slowly on the main show. I think because I took such a long gap, I keep finding myself forgetting that like Moraine and Lan are on a very different trajectory than the trajectory from the books, and we'll leave it vague, but it's like there's not like constant reminders that Moraine has been excommunicated from the order, right? That she is like out in the wilderness metaphorically. And so then when I start to compound the things I forget, I'm like, wait, so that she's on her own and she's lost land, and Lan is maybe going back to the order to blah, 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 blah. All the things that are very obvious to the people who are watching the show as a normal person would. And so I find myself just kind of mystified at the direction that this is all going in. And to the point I made originally, like, that's rare in an adaptation, right? That you would be able to really do this. I want to leave it very vague because there was a very recent adaptation where a popular movie was turned into an anime, and the first episode you were like, oh, they just literally drew the movie, and then at the end there's a twist, and suddenly the entire show is just on this whole different trajectory. And it was this very exhilarating experience to get to watch this animated adaptation.
Does it rhyme with Mott Bilgrim?
I'm leaving it vague. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. But it was just this kind of shocker of like, oh, you lulled me into thinking this is one thing and it's something entirely different.
Yeah.
And I feel that way often with this show. Like there's just enough that's familiar that I'm lulled into like, here we go. It's time to see these characters do these things. And then when you actually kind of when I anyway layer on all the things that are different, it's like shocking how original this is.
Yeah. Ben, I am about to move on to another plot. If you have any last thoughts on Lan and the Greens.
I'm already going through and highlighting all my stuff about Rand, so go ahead.
Excellent. That is not where I am moving for a while, but it's good to know you are prepared. I actually want to move on to our last not one of the boys. Moraine eventually has her path intersect with Rand at the end of the last episode, but she largely stands alone, in particular in the fourth episode, which introduces an idea that we've gotten hints at in the books, but is largely new to people who have been following along with us. The idea that Moraine now looks a whole lot younger than her younger sister. And that dynamic between those two characters, I thought really carried a decent chunk of that fourth episode, and I thought really worked. Greg, as someone who has now heard a couple of references to the Aes Sedai face, but otherwise had not really had this idea of slowing of the aging process introduced, how did this land for you?
Oh, I loved it. I thought they played it exactly right. And I will say I knew that this was true, but not to the extreme level that this was true. Like I kind of figured that Moraine might be like 80, right? And it's
Yeah.
clear she might be much more than that. It actually reminds me of Aragorn when they drop that into the second Lord of the Rings movie,
I,
right?
I
That
think
Aragorn
80
is
might
super
actually
old.
be overstating it.
Oh,
I
okay.
want to say Moraine is like
Oh,
60, 65.
oh, okay. Well, anyway, I thought she was like slightly older, and it's more than I thought. So you're right. I shouldn't be off the cuff with math, especially. But I like this a lot, and I mean the sweet simplicity of just a painting of the two of them, where you're
Yeah.
like, oh, that's Moraine looking like she does now, and that old lady as a little child, and it just was simple and easy, and a really good prop beyond anything else that you can be like, yeah, that's Rosamund Pike right now, or 5 years ago it looks like versus this. So, it was a lot of fun, and I didn't catch the name of the actress who plays the sister, but the way she acted like an expectant younger sibling who this is her hero coming home and
Yeah.
there's a lot I'm guessing at, and that's implied there more than stated. But it was really well done. It was an interesting bit of performance that really helped, and an unusual bit of performance. But I totally bought that. And when she acted a little petulant at times, it felt like, yeah, that's how I act to my older sibling, probably.
Yeah.
I thought they did a really good job blending the kind of petulance of her as the younger sister and then using that to surprise you with her competence
Yeah.
because she's also someone who has for 60 years been building the house back up and is a master of the game in Carrion. And watching them in reverse order, it was nice to see how she turns up at the party
Yeah.
with Rand and kind of has a little
Mm.
scene there that's echoed later because she actually Marie's been doing all this work trying to figure out where Rand is, and all along she could have asked her sister, but didn't. She only thinks of her sister as her little sister.
Yeah, I thought that the moment where we get kind of the turn, where it's revealed that the little sister has been kind of manipulating events behind the scenes, potentially to keep Moraine from learning what she wants and to learn it herself, that is one of the more effective, like, pull the rug out from under you moments that the show has pulled off so far. I was just remarkably impressed by this plot line. It's more or less whole cloth, and it works through and through. I think all of my notes we've already covered. That painting was perfect. I guess the only thing that to me is odd about the Moraine plot is we see a lot of her spending time figuring out where Rand is and interacting with Logain, which I think is another scene that works just extremely well. But there is a weird gap in this, in that in the books, her only thing that she does in this like book and a half is find out what is going on with Lanfear by doing research. And we don't get that. She just kind of immediately knows what is going on with Rand and Lanfear. Did anyone have that kind of reaction that I had as well, that she just kind of shows up with knowledge? Or am I nitpicking because I always want everything from the book to show up on the show? Greg, tell me I'm wrong.
Oh, I thought she was just jealous of her, and that's why she did what she did at the end of the fourth episode. Oh, you're saying she knew she was a Forsaken. Interesting. And no, I think it is a cottage she was in when she made that discovery, right? I have that
Yeah.
book detail correct, and that was a kind of nice little setting and a place, and the idea of some kind of Aes Sedai protecting knowledge at a cozy little cottage somewhere like that all is very nice. And so I think it is sad to lose that, but I do think if the show needs to make Moraine feel always on top of everything, this isn't that bad a stretch to me that she would know Lanfear, be able to recognize her, or have some other portent to kind of understand who this is. And if that's what the cost of the kind of awesome surprise close to these episodes is,
Yeah.
I'm for it.
I think there was something inelegant in the way that the show handled this. I agree. there's a part where Alana and Maxim and Yvonne find a prophecy or something.
Yeah, it's the note that was translated off of the Quendiar that Moraine had bought from Bail Domon in the first episode.
Yeah. So that's a very complicated thing to try to get across.
Right.
And then they're like, oh my God, Lanfear's alive. So, I mean, I think they're trying to tell you, oh, Moraine already knew this because,
Yeah.
this is something of hers that they've discovered or whatever, and now they're sharing it with us. But until we started talking about it now, I really actually had in my notes like, huh? Like I didn't know. Like, okay, I'm just gonna follow along with this. But it was this like big reveal in the show, and it was very confusing to me to remember where that had all come from.
Yeah, I think to some degree, what we're identifying is what in the first season I felt like was kind of the pacing problem from having 8 episodes as opposed to like the 10 or 12 or 13 that we might be used to from a lot of other prestige TV shows, right? This feels like the kind of thing that could have been fleshed out with a few more scenes if we had one more episode to stretch everything across, and we just didn't. I don't really have too much else to say about this in that Moraine is largely absent from the 3rd episode, and then the 4th, I think the age story is the important thing here. Any last thoughts before we move on to the boys?
That awesome costume already shouted out. So
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that costume is one of 2 we are going to discuss today. We are talking about Moraine's blue dress that appears on one of the original covers of the book and has been directly adapted by the costume creator, as opposed to being a completely original work. If we are going to the boys, then let's start with the one where the only note I have is there anything to talk about here? ? Matt is in a prison cell and then gets let out of a prison cell and then lets Min out of her prison cell. And it turns out Min is working for Leandrin. I think the last piece is the only one that we really have much to say anything about. Greg, what were your thoughts on the Matt portion of this plot line? Is it just in a holding pattern until something later on happens?
I mean, the only thing I want to talk about in Matt's pattern, Matt's storyline is Min, and I feel like Min has gotten a promotion here and has become more interesting. There's an old joke about Lord of the Rings, how they keep meeting people who could really solve all their problems, and then they just like wave them goodbye. It's like, goodbye, giant walking trees. We're off to go have a war.
Yeah.
Goodbye, giant eagles who can solve everything. We're off to go, right? And why don't they just have an eagle fly them to Mount Doom and drop in the ring? Seems like you could skip a couple books there. And so I think it felt like Min kind of had that treatment before. It's like, wow, she's incredibly powerful. Bye, Min. See you in a couple books. Like, don't worry about it. So I do think that it's exciting to have this this new kind of plot line with Min in this relationship with Leandrin. A kind of she's being controlled and manipulated. And I really like that it's all based around the idea that she can end the visions, right? Like she's a superhero cursed with a power who will do anything just to rid herself. And I assume we're supposed to kind of walk away from that thinking like, is that actually something Leandrin can do? It feels like a false promise because the Min we know from the books, it's like nobody knows how she has these visions. So how would they be able to stop them?
I think it's something Ishmael or whatever his name is can do.
It's Shaman.
Ishamel. Okay.
I know. I do it every time.
Yeah. I like that Min gets a scene in the Teleron Riod with him, and he says, I've got so many names in this age, or when she asks who he is exactly.
Yeah.
Which I like when they drop those kind of little clues, but it seems like he's the secret for how maybe he would have enough power to remove her ability. I don't think he would ever do it, but
yeah, I think the way that he phrases it when he's talking to her is he says something like, Leandrin promised that you could have the visions taken away. Did you think you could get that from anywhere but the dark? And I thought that was like a really good way of like, ooh, you kind of knew what you were buying into already. The other thing that I wanted to just really quickly mention is you said, Ben, he was listing off kind of the things that he was known by. He's like, I have so many names. One of them we have actually heard used on the television show before in in season 1, in one of the scenes where they are speaking the old tongue, they say betrayer of hope and pronounce it in the old tongue as Ishamael. He literally says what his name is. Any other thoughts that you had? I'm now going to ask Ben while he is taking a drink. I kind of cut you off in the middle. Other highlights from these sequences?
The only other note I have is that Matt is a dick. At like the part where at the end where he sees Egwene and he's just like, that seems like that would be too difficult having that conversation. I'm just gonna leave again. Like it's hard to have a lot of sympathy with Matt in this
I
format.
both have no sympathy and have probably done that multiple times in my teenage years. Greg, please do anything other than ask me more detailed questions about this.
Teenage year, I do that at faculty parties all the time. I'm like, I don't really want to. I'm just gonna. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I still don't understand Matt on this show. I just want to hang a lantern on this. I think it's probably obvious and in the background of all the comments you're all making, but I'm like, I know Matt grabbed that dagger and it feels like he should be experiencing a plot line that we know existed and started on the show. It's not that I'm just saying they've changed it from the books, but like they started that plot line on the show. And so it's really bizarre to me. And I think, to kind of like Ben was saying earlier, I find myself trying to place him in later plot lines from the books or from other, and it's like, oh, he's not really in any of those either. So I think my kind of general unease about him, it's like, where is he and what's he doing and what's going on is so unclear in this case.
I just want to point out how amazing it is that that is your takeaway on a show that is an adaptation. We have a through line for this episode, and that's crazy. I want to now move on to what is obviously the plot line nearest and dearest to my heart, Perrin. And mostly you can talk about whatever you want to, but I'm going to spend the entire time talking about the single best casting of the entire television show. Hopper has the perfect actor. Ben, say whatever you want about Perrin.
They did a really great job with revealing Hopper's name as he jumps after the sparks and everything. That was beautiful. So yeah, well done, Hopper. Good acting.
This, I just want to confess as we start to talk about this is the one that made the least sense in reverse order. I was like, wait, what is happening? I was like, I have no idea what's going on. So just to bracket that as like very confusing. I do like the, gosh, now I'm blanking. It's Elias, the Wolf Walker guy. I do like that actor as well. Yes, maybe Hopper should, I only became aware in the last couple of years that at the Cannes Film Festival, which awards the Palme d'Or to the top film, they also have an unofficial award called the Palme d'Og, which is for the best dog performance in any film shown at the festival. And there was some really good dog acting last year in 2023 that got attention in that. So maybe we have a new Palme d'Og nominee. But I did enjoy this plotline a lot. I think, again, I had been worried that when we skipped so much of this in season 1 that we weren't going to get it, even though I kind of thought we'd have to backdoor our way into it. And now seeing it, it's really just exactly what I want it to be. It's not all that different, but it's, done well enough that I enjoy it. And I imagine that's where you are, Tyler. I mean, this is your favorite character, right? So how's it doing for you?
I am really loving it. My only complaint that I have so far is that the way that we are seeing wolf visions, for example, Hopper's name, we see him kind of jumping up at the fireflies or what have you. That I think the only problem I have with it is that it reads a little too similar to Min's visions. And so there's a part of me that maybe wants those to feel a little more distinct, but otherwise I'm loving this. I only have one other kind of major comment / complaint about Perrin's plotline, and it happens at the very, very beginning of the 3rd episode, or as the two of you would call it, halfway through these episodes. We kind of pick up from the end of the 2nd episode. We have the Shan Chan on the giant pyramid that apparently they carry around with them. And we initially get kind of all of them deciding whether or not to kneel and swear the oaths to the Shan Chan. And Uno, the one-eyed Shinarin, is killed on the television show, which most definitely does not happen in the books. And while I cannot say anything to either of you about what Uno does later on in the series, I can say he doesn't not appear elsewhere in the series. So as a longtime book reader, I was like, what? He died, huh? I have nothing else to add to that other than what, huh? What other thoughts did you have on the Perrin plot line? Any moments that stood out? Ben, I'll let you go first.
Well, this is the moment I want to talk about the amazing costume work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they really, gosh, what's her name? Alwyn,
So-
the one who speaks for
oh,
Serath.
yes.
Like the way that her hair is shaved on the side, but just slightly higher up on the side than you would even see in kind of a modern haircut. It
Yep.
just makes it all like
Mm.
very, like they're so off-putting, and they from a different place than all the rest of
Yeah.
the scenery design in this show. They did a really good job kind of being like just giving you the feeling like everybody here is completely unsettled and doesn't know what to do. And Uno's death is really horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like he falls into a grand tradition of Irish martyrs who die saying
Yeah.
"fuck you" and your oaths. Like that's a grand tradition, famous in song, and so good for you, Uno, for keeping up the Irish tradition.
The fact that our one curse for our ability to stay not adult is Uno is 100% themed after these books. I need you to know that. Greg, any other thoughts on this plot line?
Just agree on the costumes. I'm looking forward to seeing more of the Shan Chan. I mean, there's obviously some creatures and such that I imagine will be imaginative, but this has really got me excited. It reminded me kind of Dune as a recent experience where like the costuming is kind of so wild and just kind of going for it. And my only other silly note is just I really liked I have a kind of I forgot the word for it. I was gonna say a bed bug, but that's not something that bothers you, like
A bee in your bonnet?
uh, no, I'll think of it in a minute. Bugbear, a bugbear. I have a bugbear. There's a little bugbear in me. Actually, Ryan Johnson pointed out one time that the most influential film shot of the 21st century is the saver on Apple TV, which taught all these directors to do like a slow drone. And so I kind of hate when there's a slow overhead drone shot. But this one, on the show when they're having the big confrontation with the Shan Chan, there's a very far off drone circling, and I really liked that as a shot. And maybe it was a helicopter, but I assume it was a drone. And it just kind of you know, I watch a lot of movies, I watch a lot of shows, and then like I just pause sometime and like that is crazy that they were like, go do your scene and we're gonna fly a robot like 40 feet away and just kind of slowly circle you. And it's I think it's just where there's a couple characters walking towards the other. But a shot like that really grounds it in reality that like, yes, there's majesty to the pyramid and the costume and all that, but like these are all just like a bunch of weird people in a crowd in a small village. And it just really worked for me. So I liked that particular shot.
Yeah, I think that shot just works if for no reason other than establishing the scale of how many extras they had on set. That feels like the kind of shot that they probably wanted to have for the finale of season 1 and couldn't get because of COVID. And now they're like, look, guys, we were able to get 100 people in a field together. And I think that is just a wonderful thing kind of to celebrate for film after the couple of years we had. I think it's time for the main event, according to book readers, and very much not so, according to the television show writers. It is Rand's plot line. And we've spent a decent amount of time talking about costuming so far. I need to shout out the red and gold coat that Rand wears at the party in Kyrien in the first episode. That is probably the single most famous piece of kind of clothing in all of Wheel of Time. I think it appears in 3 of the original book covers. I don't know that we've seen any of them yet, but getting an adaptation of that outfit in particular was weirdly satisfying and worked really well as a longtime book reader. Ben, I don't need you to respond to that coat in particular, but I simply need to give you an opportunity to wax poetic about Rand and or Lanfear, knowing your opinions about Lanfear.
Oh, I was gonna say, you mean the coat that Lanfear says, "Oh, leave your jacket on, my lord"?
That's the one.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's got the heron jackets on. And so it's cool it's a heron jacket. And it's she earlier on, she mentions when they're at the cabin, she starts talking about how someone she used to know who definitely seems to be like Luz Theron or something,
Yeah.
who she used to go to that cabin with, right? And then he's got the heron jacket and she's like, no, you wear that. So yeah, I thought that part was really amazing. And yeah, I think that I'm just gonna say I think that Lanfear slash Celine is extremely seductive. And in the book, she's just kind of like, oh, she's just really beautiful. But in this one, it's like, no, she's like actually hot in a whole other kind of way. Like when she's like, what is it? What is it that she says? I kind of um like I'm a monster too, like, or like I'm a, like I can't
Yeah.
remember what she's about him being a monster also. Like it's just like it's like, yeah, like let it out. Like this is gonna be awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
I think she has a kind of slinking physicality a lot of the time too that reinforces that, which I didn't necessarily read into the book character, but it
No.
does kind of just exude all the things she needs to exude to win over the dragon. Definitely good. Not an actress I knew at all. I guess she's a Peaky Blinders actress is what I glossed from some internet. And well, and I was laughing because she when you put her name into Google, it's like her and Killian Murphy, and I'm like, wait, what? Like now we're just doing Oppenheimer crossovers. But I think he maybe was on those old shows. Not
Yeah.
that we're revealing when I'm Googling at all. Who's ever talking about Killian Murphy ever once? Uh, I think the plot line works really well at making Rand interesting in a time when it kind of scraped away a lot of what I would have thought made him interesting from this book.
Yeah.
And so the way they've represented Carhane and
Tyrion.
all this Carrion, sorry. That all of this plot line is all working. It's very much kind of like the gates are there, the guards are there, all the little pieces are just signaled just enough, kind of like you were saying before, when there's not something that actively contradicts the continuity, you can just kind of assume the continuity is all there. And I think that's a good strategy with adaptation again, because if somebody has something they treasure and you can just like not suggest it didn't happen, even if you need to skip it, I think that works well to satisfy book crowd.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it actually brings me to something that I want to ask the two of you, because I can't decide whether the television show is changing something about the books or simply portraying something in a way that it's hard to tell. So in the books, when a man or woman channels, only another man who can channel could see the flows being channeled by a man, and only another woman who channels could see the flows being channeled by a woman. But on the television show, we can seemingly always see the flows. And so what I'm curious about is in the scene, for example, where Rand and Celine are together and he lights the ceiling on fire, or in the scene where he is battling the merge rail and he summons the flame and lights the merge rail on fire. Do you think Celine can see the flows of power around him, or is she just seeing like the merge rail light on fire and not seeing those kind of threads of flame that are looping around him? I honestly can't make up my mind about whether the TV show has changed this detail or not.
I think that she can see him, and it's something I thought about because I thought about how she is not an Aes Sedai. That is not the kind of power that she might. I don't know if she would technically tap into the same kind of power that Rand does, But in the last part, right before Moraine shows up and ruins everything, Lanfear's starting to exude some power herself, and it looks a lot like what Rand would have, right? It's the part where she
Yeah.
says, "I'm a monster too." Like
Mhm.
it, their power looks similar, and so it made me think that she's also somebody who could teach Rand how to use that.
Yeah.
Mm. Uh, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't know that was true in the books, and so I have no way to weigh in on that on the show. A standard Greg, I'm not supposed to know anything answer, which I'll beg off on. But I did I just to pick up on Ben's point, like I guess I found myself questioning a lot Lanfear's kind of origin and power set. So let me just again, I'm going to go in typical Greg mode because I'm doing this performatively for the audience of our show. I definitely understood this fully myself. Scared face. So how we are to interpret episode 4, which maybe some of us thought was episode 3, is that Ishamael went and cast a spell, did some dark magic type things, and that freed Lanfear from something kind of like the prison of the Dark One or a Forsaken, right? Like something kind of
Correct.
sealed. She comes out and is coated in blood,
Yep.
which is a really weird way to open episode 3, but kind of works as the opening of episode 4. Um, and then he essentially sets her loose. And we didn't shout out. I was very surprised Ashamael was with the Shan Chin too. Like
Yeah.
everything seems to be more coordinated through him. And I would believe even more that he's the Dark One if they weren't so clearly signaling this is Ishamael in ways that
Yeah.
are very, very obvious, like throughout. And so then are we meant to assume that Lanfear is working in concert with him since he freed her, or is it more that she's like a free, evil, sexy, dark agent, free agent?
If your role on the podcast is to not answer questions because you don't know that much yet, my role on the podcast is to not answer questions because I can't answer that question. Ben, do you have any hypotheses about whether Lanfear is working with or against Ishamael or kind of how they are overlapping at this point? Because I definitely cannot answer that question.
Well, I think just with the stuff that um uh having followed the podcast
Yep.
and wherever you guys are at this point, I have definitely got the feeling that the Forsaken do not, that they coordinate loosely, but they are also in their own internal power struggles. So
Yep.
I tended to believe that he would have freed her because it might help him with his own aims, but she is independent and might not always be on his side. That was
Yeah.
my take.
I like that. I buy it. I can say no more. I think the last scene that I wanted to highlight was the scene between Logain and Rand, because there's something really exciting about seeing Rand wanting to learn and kind of putting in the effort to develop his powers, given that so much of that character, especially in the first season, is him kind of being afraid of what he might be and trying to kind of resist, that he is actually the dragon. So I thought that kind of interaction between them, with Rand being the one like, I am willing to go above and beyond, I'll break into a fancy party to get you the wine, seeing him desperate like that, I thought was really interesting. Any other kind of thoughts or comments on this plot line broadly, or that scene in particular?
If this was, I was really struck by something in that scene, which is if this was a movie from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, maybe even the 60s, I would have definitely thought this is a kind of a that Logain seemed like a wise old queen helping Rand out of the closet, right? Like they
Right.
just had
Mm.
that vibe. Like Rand's like, there's just this thing, this desire in me that I want to get out, and
Yeah.
I just want to figure out how to make it stop. And he's like, no, like you have, you have the urge to touch it all the time, don't you? And it's just like I it, that felt that vibe was really there, and I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting for the what that means for it being the Sidar or whatever. But it's not that, because this show would just deal with that if that's what it wanted to deal with. But it's just interesting to me, like it just picked up on that old pattern.
Yeah, and I think to me, the really interesting kind of follow-up on that is in that discussion, Logain specifically calls out he doesn't think that channeling the one power as a man makes him insane. He doesn't believe it causes madness. And so that pushing back on that while simultaneously, as you're saying, this feeling like kind of that sort of like, I think you're exactly right to call out. This feels like that kind of mentorship / male bonding sort of sequence that we've seen over and over again in cinema. You were about to say something and I immediately cut you off rudely, Greg. Any thoughts here?
No, I actually don't think I was about to say something, or if I was, I forgot what it was. Well, echoing in my mind, the friends who watched this, the first 2 episodes with us, that last episode we lovingly called the Peanut Gallery, one of whom is now on this Zoom, pointed out what a great actor Logain is, and I just wanted to agree with that, and that. There's something kind of Hannibal Lecter-ish about the way this is all structured, and that's really effective, and it works. And again, not something I expected in this adaptation, but if you're kind of moving all these pieces around and reconfiguring them, what like a great combination of Lego bricks to snap into each other. Is that a bad metaphor for the relationship Ben just articulated?
Yes, it is. I don't need to hear anything else. Yes, it's a bad metaphor. I don't really have too much else to say about this plotline in particular, but as far as these 2 episodes go, this is the moment where I really feel like this show grew up. Like season 1 is uneven, but overall pretty good. The first 2 episodes of the second season are establishing some interesting things, but Nynaeve's test and Celine and all of this is just it's hitting on all cylinders as far as I'm concerned. I just want to get kind of like wrap up final thoughts on the episode. Any moments we didn't mention so far, any big picture thoughts that you have before we kind of, send off the episode. As the guest, Ben, you get to say all of the things that Greg probably would if he went first.
Okay, I'll try to think of things that Greg would probably say. So I feel like we are on a roller coaster that's slowly ticking up towards the top of a big hill, or like a fuse is approaching a powder keg that's been built up, and I'm going to have to go and watch the next 2 episodes after this immediately, because it's got me, even though I've already seen them, I kind of want to relive that again.
Oh, that's all the time, and Ben's never invited back because that was pretty mean. And no, I actually wanted to cede my time to Tyler with a question, which is, in season 1, you told us to pay attention to hidden black and white cookies. Is that still a game that's going on, or are we not really seeing that in season 2? Because I remembered that while watching and hadn't spotted any.
Not nearly as many. There are a couple of really fun details in all of the cold opens so far. I found like an interesting shape or something surprising. I think when we watched the first episode together, we open on kind of the overhead shot of that. It looks almost like a temple where the, tea party of evil is happening. And I pointed at it and I was like, why does that have 6 points? It should be 7, right? Because I immediately was playing that game. I was like, maybe it's not black and white cookies, but there are other kind of similar Easter eggy sort of details that I see popping up a lot. The easy, I think, obvious one in these episodes is at the beginning of episode 4 when we see Ishamael going to let free Lanfear, there's a shot where they look up at the top of the canyon, and it's actually in the shape of a dragon with the head and the wings and the legs if you are, if you cross your eyes and blur it a little bit. And so there's been a lot of moments like that where I haven't seen, in the first season, there are like 30 black and white cookies that I found of, just things that immediately go into, that circle with the 2 teardrops. I haven't seen quite as many of those, but there are a few really fun Easter eggs in episodes 7 and 8 that I am definitely going to bring us back to. Thank you for ceding your time to me. I get to say some wonderful things. Before anything else, I just want to say this has been a really great opportunity for us to kind of start breaking down the television show. And most of all, it's an opportunity for us to bring Ben on, because the reason I did this podcast is to make my friends talk about the Wheel of Time with me. And guess what, y'all? I got two of my friends to talk about the Wheel of Time with me for about an hour. Ben, do you have any last thoughts or anything that you'd like to shout out of your own that you kind of want to promote while you have an opportunity to our probably pretty small audience?
To yourself in the future.
No, I don't feel the need to shout anything. I will say that I've started having some dreams about the Wheel of Time. So mission accomplished, Tyler. Really nice. You prophesied all of this and it's coming true.
They always say that you really speak a foreign language when you start dreaming it, and you really know that you speak the Wheel of Time when you start dreaming through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend the show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.